Hello and welcome back. We are continuing our beginner tutorial playthrough here as Spain, where we show every single action in all kind of one singular clip while explaining a deeper concept. Last episode, we specifically addressed and talked about buildings and how they produce value, and also discussed the importance of prices. What we're going to do now is we're going to unpause, take things as they go, and we are going to be talking about budget, as well as how economics in Victoria 3 generally work, and how they're so much different than other games, and why a positive balance, or having a positive balance, isn't even a good thing in Victoria 3. In fact, it's often a bad thing, and understanding why it's the case that this is, which is counterintuitive and not the case in other games, but also understanding why kind of the meta for budget that we are going to explain is what it is. Now, let's kind of jump into this. In general, you want to increase taxes as much as you can in order to afford more construction, as long as you still have peasants, which is going to be a considerable amount of the game, especially because you tend to get more peasants as you get more economic activity. We're going to increase it all the way. However, there is something to note here, which is that this minimum expected standard of living modifier is really, really important. If you are below the minimum expected standard of living, you will generate a whole ton of radicals. You could see we are generating some from having standard of living below expected, and what you can do is you can hover standard of living here, and you can see if there's an exclam, that means a lot of your people are below it. This is an average, so if you're starting to approach the number and it's starting to look close, and our standard of living has not even dropped, this 8.8 hasn't even dropped from us raising taxes yet to the max level. Once it starts dropping, we're probably going to be a little bit too close to the minimum expected standard of living, so what we're going to do is we are going to decrease and we are going to run high taxes, but if we got a bunch of things that increase standard of living, like for example, if we were to implement a public health insurance, which gives a free standard of living modifier, if we got a lot of these modifiers, we could try and run high taxes, and this would be preferable, but for us, we're going to run, we would want to run very high, but we would also run high. Also important is this legitimacy. There are important legitimacy breakpoints without going too much into it, and 50 is actually an important one, and so if we were above at very high taxes, we would actually be below 50, and this would be another reason to run just regular high taxes, especially at the... what's up with my mouse? Especially in the beginning of the game. So, with that said, we're going to be stuck here on high taxes for our taxation level. For the consumption taxes, we're going to remove these, and then in general, the resource you're using here is going to be authority, and you want to generate as much government income as possible per authority with a really heavy-handed asterisk here. And that asterisk is you are going to want to look in the population tab, and you're going to want to look at what pops are consuming, and specifically, it is preferable to target the upper strata here in terms of what they're consuming. And so when you look at what they're consuming in large numbers, and if that is not where the lower strata is consuming, in general, you would prefer to tax this. Without going into too much detail on this, the reason why is it will take more money to raise a standard of living for a singular pop for the upper strata than the lower strata, because the cost increases exponentially in order to increase wealth level, which informs standard of living. So it might cost 100 ducats to increase the, and by the way, I know it's pounds, not ducats, but I call them ducats. It might take 100 ducats to go from 24 to 25, let's say, hypothetically, but only 10 ducats to go from 8 to 9. So all other things equal, it's better for your average standard of living to tax the upper strata. So we would prefer to tax stuff like that. Coming back in here, we're going to put in a bunch of consumption taxes. We're going to start with services, which the upper strata is consuming a lot of, and transportation. We can go back here, double check. We will see stuff like luxury furniture, surprise, surprise, and clothing is going to be consumed more. Now we see regular clothing is getting consumed at a higher rate, but it's also really consumed by the lower rung pops. It's important to note that consumption taxes, or not very important, but interesting, they will not affect consumer behavior. But you see here, we could generate more revenue per authority, 300 authority for this clothes tax, but we're still going to choose luxury clothes tax because we would rather tax the upper strata. Also, the upper strata is not as in danger of being below minimum expected standard of living. They're not kind of hugging the margin anywhere near as much as the lower strata is here, which is going to inform radicalism, which is bad, but it's too much to get into here. Now, kind of coming in, we are also going to take a look at tobacco. Now, our lower rung pops are consuming tobacco. This is true. But this is insanely more efficient. It's 3 times the efficiency. And so we're going to put in the luxury tax on here. And you might see pretty soon our standard of living will likely start to drop here. Finally, for government wages and military wages, the negative training rate modifier is really, really, really nasty. And if you forget that you decrease military wages, this is going to make it so all your battalions have no units. So while you could decrease it, I would not recommend it at all, especially because generally military wages are not a big portion of your economy. And practically speaking, I don't think fiddling with military wages is going to be that useful. You could run higher wages if you wanted, but you can also use different sort of military PMs in order to make that easier, but we won't talk too much about the military just yet. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to lower government wages. The kind of things that are negative for this is it's only going to lower some of the lower stratas salaries. The negative prestige isn't too big a deal. It can make you drop in power rank, but it will take a year of being lower in order for this to happen. We see a league has formed. Anti-Dutch League has formed as a result of decreased relations with the Netherlands here, and we have a bunch of people in it. So this is maybe a little bit of an opportunity. We can make our interest groups happier if we kind of go and lean into this. So we're just going to come and we're going to go to diplomatic actions and we're going to rival the Dutch. This will give all of our guys a lot more approval here. And so this will make it easier for us to get bonuses. But coming back into what we were saying regarding the government wages here, and continuing on our merry way, this negative prestige isn't too big a modifier. This approval is kind of a big modifier if it's going to bring you over a breakpoint, but the breakpoints happen in groups of 5, and so as a result, it's generally not worth worrying about too much, because if we had 2 more approval, this wouldn't move us up to +5, so we wouldn't get the bureaucracy bonus, and if we had 2 more approval here, we wouldn't get the society research speed either. And so it's not going to be that big a modifier, and so this is generally kind of what you want the strategy for budget to be without explaining it. If you just wanted the strategy and that's all you wanted and you just wanted to get into game, I'd recommend stopping watching the video at this point. If you want to understand why and kind of the deeper economic system of Victoria 3, then we're going to continue on here, and that is going to be that we are going to say, even though it looks like we're making a ton of money now, we are not creating value with any of this. This is not creating value what we are doing here. Instead, what it is doing is it is passing value. There are 2 economies in Victoria 3, right? There is the government economy, which we are seeing growing and getting bigger and having a really big positive balance now, but there is also the consumer goods economy. What you will see likely if we hover GDP is our GDP has actually gone down as a result of our taxing. And also we see here we are losing power rank, but we are so close to the cusp we're probably okay. But our GDP has gone down because in order to do this, we have actually wrecked the consumer economy. We are going to see here, we didn't really have consumption taxes on the upper strata before. Now we have 19% consumption taxes, and also we are going to see these guys' standard of living dropping off here. As standard of living, more specifically as wealth, but wealth is standard of living without modifiers, as standard of living drops, these pops will consume less and less goods. Remember that one of the reasons why a building is profitable is because it is got expensive goods here, right? So this iron is profitable not just because the PM is producing value, but it is producing value by having the input goods multiplied by the prices and the output goods multiplied by the prices, and so price is important, iron being expensive is important. As we have increased taxes, these guys have less and less to consume, and so they drop in SOL. As they drop in SOL, what will happen is their buy basket will get smaller. When their buy basket gets smaller, they will consume less. As you can see here, the upper strata has dropped 2 SOL here, which is a pretty big number, but we are targeting them specifically. As they consume less goods, there will be less buy orders in the market for the goods. This will drop the price of the goods, and so if we were to take a look at, say, luxury clothing or luxury furniture, it's dropped off in price. This makes all the buildings that produce those less profitable. We'll quickly swap over the PMs, but this is important because as these get less profitable, this will shrink our GDP. And so our GDP has shrunk as a result of us taxing more. And so this is kind of an important, we got some events. We'll get through the events real quick, and then we'll see. Okay, we would rather piss off, generally speaking, the Catholic Church, because they don't have as good bonuses. We have an opportunity to gain an agitator. This guy's a radical. We'll invite him in, although we won't talk about agitators just quite yet. But he has a good ideology. That's why we wanted it in. Radical's relatively good. And we see here, this is an interesting one related to kind of what we've talked about. We have appeasement of the Anti-Dutch League. This would raise the opinion of the interest groups that are in that, which we kind of noted here, which is going to be these three interest groups, which is maybe something to play for. But we also see this legitimacy thing. We talked about earlier that it was an important breakpoint, right? That this 50 was an important breakpoint. And so if we wanted, we were at 55 before. I was going to say, if we were at 55 and we raised it to 60, then we could increase taxes without going into the 50 bracket. But we'll just take the appeasement then. But the thing I wanted to kind of hone in on here is really kind of talking about the buildings and how other strategy games work, generally speaking, and how Victoria 3 is different. Because in Victoria 3, like, on top of this, the value is created in the buildings. And we know that if we drop the price of these consumer goods, the building will produce less value. But also, very importantly, the building isn't creating value for the government directly. It is creating value, and this value, in the case of this building, which is owned by, private industries, it's owned by a financial district here, it is creating value, but the value doesn't go directly to the government. Instead, it goes to the owners, and it goes to the pops that are working there in terms of wages. We'll start researching railroads too here. That way we can maintain infrastructure. It's going to go to the people in terms of the balance and the wages. What a lot of other games work like is completely different from this, because what we do is we create value in wages and balance, and then we have means by which we can pass this back to the economy in terms of using taxes and various things to pass money to the economy. If we were to think of something like a city builder, what a city builder generally do is you have a building, it has inputs, but the inputs are amounts and they aren't manipulated by prices, and it has outputs, and then you just create supply chains so that you have properly amounted inputs and outputs of all your buildings, then they're all balanced, and you create supply chains. And then what you do is you create as many populations with that as you can. You create as much pop as you can, in one of these games, and then from the pops you tax the money. You pull out the money from the pops, and you don't care because the tax is the site at which you create value in a sort of city builder game, but you don't create value at the site of taxation in Victoria 3. This is just passing money from one group to another. Also, kind of another games like EU4, you might have something like a church that produces tax income, and that tax income is just free money directly to the government. This doesn't go to the government. It goes to the pops, and then it is with the tool of taxes that we extract the money. Now you see here, we're running a positive balance, but our economy is collapsing here. And that is because we are sucking money out of the economy overall, and like I said, running a positive balance will damage the economy. Because what is happening is we are passing money from the pops to the government, and then the government is just holding on to the money. It's not spending it. Remember that our iron mine was really, really profitable. Our iron mine was profitable earlier when we were constructing a lot. We can see here that the price of iron has gone down. Well, what you can do as the government is you can re-stimulate the economy, and this is the fundamental loop, is you increase the taxes not to have a big positive balance, but you increase taxes because what you are trying to do is you are trying to invest money strategically in your economy as best as possible and get increasing SOL kind of only has positive short-term benefits, generally speaking, and having more buildings is a better benefit. You know, if you can construct more buildings, this is a bigger benefit than having higher SOL. So what you do is you take the government economy, right? And then you pass the money back into the GDP by adding construction. And this is kind of a very fundamental playthrough, is you don't want to have this massive positive balance. Instead, what you want to do is you want to extract money from the consumer economy and transmute it into construction. And you transfer the money over into construction. And so, as you can see here, we're about to start running a very negative balance again. But the idea is we're going to have more construction. We're going to be building more buildings. These buildings are going to be producing value for us. And so we are trying to pass money strategically from the consumer economy to the government economy, and now it is going to stimulate the economy, and also it's going to go back into the GDP as we start running a negative balance. Prices will rise, profitability will rise. This iron is about to get really expensive. The tools are also going to get really expensive as we add more construction here, with the second construction sector coming in. We are being strategic in the way that we are effectively making our economy proportionally less consumer goods, and we are making it proportionally more construction goods by taxing the pops down on the consumer goods and re-injecting. But this re-injection is an important aspect. We don't want to run a positive balance here. Now, I think it's worth talking about that minting is loan interest rate. It's getting right into what we're about to talk about. All of these effects here, except for two, are just strictly speaking passing value. In particular, let's talk about interest. The interest actually doesn't delete value. You don't lose this value. It gets paid out to the ownership pops. And so when we are doing this, this is effectively like a reverse tax on the rich. It's not exactly what we want, but it's stimulating the economy. It's not getting deleted. The pops that are receiving this are buying stuff like luxury furniture and luxury goods. We get a defamatory article. I think we'll just let it fly in here, and we can see that we actually have several shortages. So let's actually just pause real quick and resolve these shortages before we kind of get back into explaining things. We're going to solve them by importing stuff. Just to solve it on a temporary basis, imports are generally not very efficient, but what they will do is they will kind of prevent you from running a shortage for an extended period of time until it can start to be sourced locally. We also see that we are about to fall, and it has this been in for several days. It will happen in 41 days, so what we will just do is we'll increase this, and we'll let the game tick for 1 week, and then we'll decrease it back down. But as we are saying with the interest, this just passes value back to ownership pops. Let's just double check that this is 365 days. It is. Military wages, this is passing money back to units that are wages that are paid in the barracks. These servicemen are just going to spend their money on consumption goods. This is re-stimulating the economy, and it's giving you higher prices, and it's giving you opportunities for profitable buildings. The thing you don't want is to just hoover money out of the economy. You can see that our furniture manufacturers are actually struggling because of what we did to the consumption economy a little bit, to some extent. They're actually struggling way more than I would have imagined they would. But these are just passing value, and passing value is not that big a deal. One thing that is a big deal, so goods for military buildings, this is making those buildings more profitable. And it's important to note that when we have something like small arms, what's going to be happening for those guys, can we find the small arms? What's going to be happening for those guys is, yeah, this is a government building, but it pays out a balance to ownership, which is going to spend some of their money on consumption goods, and it pays it out to wages. And so as you get more and more government spending, like as we get more and more iron that's going into construction, this gives us more balance and more wages. And these high balance and high wages give us more opportunities for profitable buildings. And so passing money around is a-okay. It's not like a very bad thing, but there are some things that are bad. And that's like when money gets deleted. And so let's talk about one instance where money gets deleted, which is government dividends. So if we find a building that is owned by the government, and this will kind of go as to why, explaining why in general we want to have our buildings privatized. And we'll talk more about ownership later, but one of the things is the weekly balance here doesn't go out to ownership pops. The ownership is the Spanish government here. Where this money goes, instead, it is going to, some of it goes to reinvestment. That goes to the investment pool, which is used to pay for construction goods and would pay for more construction goods if we had more construction. That is also why one of the reasons why we added a whole bunch of construction, and it still is not, we're not running that negative a balance right now because we're not growing by the investment pool by as much as we were before. In fact, why don't we add even more construction here? I think Navarra has a few spots. But some of this is going off to reinvestment. The other part is government dividends. You notice that government dividends in here are half of the reinvestment. Well, the reinvestment rate is going to be... Is the mathing funny here? The math is mathing funny here. It's not telling us, actually... The math isn't mathing the way it's supposed to, but let's kind of explain the thing. With interventionism, which is the current law we're on, half the money will go to government dividends. The other half is going to go to reinvestment. The reinvestment is going to the investment pool, as we said. The other half is going to government dividends. Well, what government dividends has is this government dividend efficiency rate. This is an example of how money is deleted. Money is deleted from the government dividend efficiency because of all the money that goes into the government dividends, only half of it reaches the coffers. And so that means that that money isn't getting passed, it's half of it's getting passed and the other half is just getting deleted. When we tax a pop, we are just passing money from them to us in order to create that value. When the money we don't pass to them, they will just spend on consumption goods. But the money that is getting deleted as a result of this efficiency, it is not getting to be purchased in terms of consumption goods. And so this means that the money is just disappearing, and this is a money deletion modifier. And so even though it looks positive in terms of how it's affecting our balance, we see the government dividends. The balance isn't what's important necessarily, because the balance is an indication of extraction from the economy, the overall economy, and doesn't take into proper account the consumer good economy. And so you can look at this and say, hey, I really like these government dividends. They're paying me a lot of money, but they are depressing the economy because they're driving down prices. You can see our economy has started to recover since we started re-adding in the construction. And so this is an example of money deletion. An example of money creation, in addition to buildings just creating value, generally speaking, is minting. Now, minting, some of this you'll get just at a base value, some of it you will get from GDP. And so as your GDP gets higher, up to 200 million, which is the cap, not for GDP, but the cap that you get for minting, you will get free minting. This money isn't taken from anyone. It just gets appeared out of nowhere. So minting is really, really powerful, and it's even better than it looks, because as we have like 10K minting, what we can do with this, if we imagine a scenario where we didn't have the 10K minting, right? And then we suddenly gained the 10K minting, what we could do is we could add probably 2 construction sectors with that minting. When we add those construction sectors with that minting, that will raise the prices on our iron mines. The iron mines will in turn then become way more profitable. This means that they will have a bigger weekly balance, which means all the ways that we extract money from the owners of the building, as you can see, there's going to be various ways like reinvestment, but also some of these are government dividends, yuck. But some of these will be paid out to the other buildings, and they will reinvest in other ways, contributing to the investment pool. You can see our investment pool is now changing negatively. This is a good thing because it means we're draining it. We want to be draining it. As we run, this will stimulate the economy. So it's not the case that we are just passing money from someone and depressing the economy in order to get this minting. We are not depressing the money. Instead, we're getting to have our cake and eat it too. And so I think these 3 things, being able to identify which thing is which, I think is pretty important. We have a die works accident. Well, you know what's true? They shouldn't have all died in vain. We will buff the trade unionists. But what we want to do is we want to be able to identify which modifiers are free money modifiers, like minting, which modifiers are money deletion modifiers, like the government dividends, and identify which ones are just passing money, like most of the taxes, and then we try and pass it as effective ways as possible when we think about the economy. So this is how we are just generally going to evaluate things, and I think it's important to kind of drive home the differentiation between this and other strategy games, because in other strategy games, there's only one economy in place in a lot of other strategy games, and that's the government economy. And so when you increase the balance, this is just like strictly good. So moving from here to here, you're like, hurrah, yay, this is fantastic. But when you do this in Victoria 3, if the money's getting passed, this means it's being taken from somewhere else, so it's not as good as it looks. Let's take a look at this cause without a rebel kind of event here, which is going to either choose to exile this agitator, or we can possibly have this guy stay. We definitely want this guy to stay because he has an ideology we like, which is radical, so we're going to let him stay. And there was another sort of thing that we needed to talk about, which is tax waste. Now, tax waste is another example of a money deletion modifier. This is a modifier that is kind of important to know about, and also one that you don't always want to address. And the big thing is if we come in here, you always want to address it if you are running a bureaucracy deficit, or nearly always want to address it if you're running a bureaucracy deficit, which we are. What this means for us is that some of the money that is getting taken from the pops in terms of tax is just being deleted, this 12.5%, which has a depressing effect on the economy. When you resolve this, you generally want to kind of come in here and you want to build in places that are A, incorporated, because that's where you're taxing, and B, have relatively high GDPs per capita if they are negative. Here we don't have anything with negative tax on this front, but if they are negative tax on this front, this will also delete money, but this will not be worth addressing unless you have very late technology, like, for example, if you are already on central planning and you're using telephone switchboards, or if you have enormous GDP per capita, which you wouldn't have. We're going to pause because we see that this is red. We'll address it in a second. Instead, what you want to do is you want to build strategically targeting places that are incorporated, high GDP per capita if they are in the red, but if you are in the green on bureaucracy balance overall, it's not worth it to get out of the red in here, because the government administration will cost more to run than you will end up gaining by decreasing the tax waste if the only tax waste is here. If you have tax waste or if you have negative bureaucracy, though, it's worth addressing. This doesn't mean that money's not getting deleted by this tax waste, it's just not going to be worth handling. So we're going to put at the front of the queue a few of these here, and we see here also this effect. Hey, look, we are below minimum expected standard of living in a whole bunch of spots here. So what we are going to do is we're going to have two options. We can lower the tax rate, and remember where we said we thought that this was going to be too high? It ended up being too high here. So what we will do is we will actually lower the tax rate, and what this will do is it's important to note that this is generally going to have a lagging effect as far as SOL goes. The SOL hasn't moved yet because it takes a while for it to move. We definitely want to be friends with the French, so we'll remain in the Spanish-French Association. The SOL hasn't moved yet, but what has changed is the minimum expected standard of living went down. And if we take a look at our radicalism, we will see that radicalism was on the rise, and a big portion of that is going to be standard of living being below expected standard of living. So this is kind of an important illustration of why we had this here that we were looking at. I think that we are going to conclude the episode here, though, because we got the primary thing we were looking at kind of addressed, which is talking about both the budget and the economy. But to very, very quickly recap, you generally want to run a high taxation level as long as you can stay above expected standard of living, and not just you have to remember that this is averages as well. So just because you're above the average, as you start to approach it, you're going to create more radicals. So if we were at 7.4 on our lower strata, we would be generating a lot of radicals here, because that means we have probably 45% of our lower strata below it, and then 55% above it if our average is 7.4. So you want to break above this by a decent margin, but run as high taxes as you can to pull money from the economy, from the consumer economy into the government economy, so you can re-inject it back into the GDP economy overall by adding construction, because we are producing value through buildings. You want to do consumption taxes, but specifically you want to target the upper strata as much as possible, because generally speaking, the upper strata can eat a deficit and stay above the expected standard of living much easier, and also there is more it takes more money to raise wealth levels by one, the higher your wealth level goes, so you will lower average standard of living more. And also, to a lesser extent, you prefer the first 15 points of standard of living more than the next 15, even if that weren't the case. But that's too much to unpack. And then also government wages here. This is semi-regressive, but it doesn't lower all the lower stratus wages, just the government building ones. So this will lower wages for government laborers, but it won't lower wages for, say, the laborers here. And this is another useful tool to decrease, because the penalties are not so much, and this is generally how you want it to look. As far as the kind of important ideas in the Victoria 3 economy go, when you are looking at the revenue, it's important to realize that there's three things that can be going on. Money can be created out of nothing. This is what happens with minting. This is a very, very strong stimulating effect, and it's extremely good. So the 10K we're getting from minting is way, way better for us than the 10K we're getting from income taxes, even though they're the same amount. Because fundamentally, this money is getting extracted from someone, it's getting passed, and so that means that that person doesn't have it, so it's depressing the economy in a different space. This is not depressing the economy anywhere, it's just pure free stimulus. And the other side of the coin is we can get money deletion. In this case, about half of the dividends, our government dividends, are getting deleted, a little bit more because we're on a bureaucracy deficit, which makes it even worse. Money deletion is particularly bad. And the third thing is kind of what we've been getting at a little bit to some extent, or the second thing rather that's important to realize in the economics, is that this government balance is not overall what is happening in the economy writ large. It's just a portion of it, because it excludes the consumer economy. The consumer economy plus the government economy is going to be equal to the GDP, and sometimes it's a little bit mixed as to what should be considered what, but it is important to realize that this is just a sliver of the economy, and so running a positive balance isn't necessarily a good thing. You generally often want to run a negative balance. So we started this episode with kind of a minus 20K balance, and we ended with a sort of minus 20K balance, but we also have very nearly double the construction we started this episode with, and it isn't because we grew the GDP, because the GDP has remained relatively even. Instead, we've extracted value from our consumer good economy, which is reeling, and we've stimulated it into our construction economy, which is going to be better, because it would be better for us to have one lower SOL for an extended period of time and have way more construction, and then produce value through that construction, get everyone from being a peasant to getting gainfully employed, and then that in turn would raise SOL. It will be long-term much, much better to create more value through having more construction. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. I think next episode we will be focused on politics and talking about trying to pass laws, talking about interest groups, and also talking about agitators, because we have one all nice and ready prepped here for us, as well as talking about movements, which is something that has appeared in 1.8. I think we already said I hope you enjoyed. If we didn't say to do the YouTube algorithm stuff, please do it. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bells if you want to see future episodes in the series. And other than that, have a good day.